Or giving you advice, I mean, while informing you what you should do, what you shouldn't do. So it's pretty straightforward. So I'm not gonna really try to deconstruct the chapters for you because, again, I may be wrong, but it's pretty straightforward. But instead, I'm gonna try to relate it to her presentation. Well, am I good? Okay.
Just can't go any further.
I'm good?
Yeah.
Well, this chapter begins by talking how important it is to obtain consent form before you even start collecting the data. And you know, based on what you read in the chapter, it's absolutely important to do so because of the history of researchers stealing people's stories, misleading participants, basically exploiting their resources without informing them properly why they were doing what they were doing, right? So this is why it's so crucially important to have your participant consent before you even start collecting data. You don't want to engage anyone in any study whatsoever without properly and accurately informing them what you are doing and what's the purpose, what's the agenda, and also informing them about the right to withdraw from the study whenever they want without any repercussions, right? So I think it's very important. That's a very basic knowledge you need to know as a researcher. You cannot engage anyone in any research whatsoever without telling them why you are doing what you are doing, and the right to stop participating in your research whenever you want. Okay, and it can be very frustrating. Like she said earlier, the woman started sharing her story with her, and then she got to a point where I said, you know what, stop everything. Do not take any notes. Do not record me. I do not want this to be recorded. I want my story to be recorded. And you have to respect that. And that can be a bit frustrating, especially when you have a participant who has a rich story to tell. A story that you feel as a researcher will help you make a stronger case in your research. But, like it's pointed out in the book, you have to respect people's decisions, So that's very important. And I did not know what a consent form was until I took my first doctoral level course. I said, what does it mean to protect one's identity? When you are doing your research, what does that really entail? What does that mean? Anyone?
Not to identify, not to give any way that I could find the person.
And how do you go back to do that? How do you ensure that the person's identity is protected? How do you do that? What are some of the strategies that we as researchers need to use in order to avoid this from happening?
Change the name.
Change the names. And that's simple. I mean, you change the name. And the person has to know from the beginning that his or her name will not be used. His or real name will not be used. People use pseudonyms in order to protect your participant identity. And that's very, very important. That's very crucial.
Would
Yes?
you ever keep the name because they want their name to be used? Or?
Well, it's really rare. It's really rare. It depends on the nature of the research. It depends on what they're sharing with you. Some people want to be known. They want to know. They want the world to know the stories.
Right.
And you have to be careful. Perhaps they say it now, but they change their mind later. You can get sued. I mean, you really have to be careful. You have to be careful. I would not. I mean, if the person wants to do it, you have to find ways to negotiate that with him or her. But to be on the safer side, I would not use the person's real name. Because typically that's not done. That hasn't been done. Yes?
For the project that we're doing in here, is it so in-depth that we need informed consent signed?
Like I said earlier, you don't need to have that. You can have an informal
Because it's not
informed
going to be
consent.
published.
Yeah, as long as it's not going to be published, you're not gonna present it at the conference. I would strongly encourage you guys to do the conferences. If you're a doctoral student, you must. I mean, I would make it must. for you to go to conference, because if your goal is to get a job, university, you know, if you want to become a professor, it's absolutely crucial that you present at conference, because that's what people are going to be looking at when they are, you know, when you're looking for a job. How many courses have you done? How many quizzes have you done? You know, you don't have to present every single semester, but at least if you're going to spend 5 years in the doctoral program, I would suggest that you have at least two major conferences in our field. Then like 3 local or regional conferences. And there are conferences happening on campus here. In fact, there is one happening next month, and I blame myself for not informing you about it last week. I forgot, honestly forgot. It may not be too late to submit a proposal to participate in the conference. That's going to be good for you. It's a good way to start. To find a comfort zone locally, regionally, before you go to the major conferences like AERA. Have you heard of AERA? It stands for AERA.
Educator Research Association.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it's a major conference in our field, one of the major conferences in our field. If you get to have a proposal accepted to present at the conference, that's going to be really good in your CV. It's so easy to get something accepted. I mean, I did not get one accepted until 2007, and although I started 2006, and although I started my doctoral studies in 2003, so it's very competitive. Up until now, I mean, I still have to make sure that my proposal is well written and find a good niche for it. Otherwise, it gets rejected, because there are so many people who are submitting proposals, and they have to select. They have a very limited spaces for proposals, therefore they are very selective. So it's very competitive. But you can start locally to get, you know, the comfort zone. Then, you know, you move up to these major conferences. Okay, so that's that. And another piece of the two shots I would like to talk about today is in-depth interview. I really like doing in-depth interviews because, like Judith mentioned earlier, I'll get you one moment. Like she mentioned earlier, it's really a form of method that allows you to put a human face on people's stories. You see, so it's very. I mean, this is one of my preferred methods. Okay, but you can use other methods to collect data. You can use field notes, right? You can do focus group. I mean, so on and so forth. But that's one of the methods I personally like to use. For example, about 3 years ago, I decided I would conduct interviews with prominent, highly respected scholars from different fields and with different foci. So with that idea, I decided I would interview people who are done research and related to race, class, gender, and language. So what I did, I selected a group of people that I know who have been doing work around race issues, and then I went on to interview people who have done work on class, then language. See, so this is a book that is made of interviews, in-depth interviews with people who are highly recognized in the field. And that's one of the books that I did with, that is based on interviews. And I recently did one last year, and I will be doing one the following year. I already got the contract for it. Because what it does when you are reading a book like this, it really enables you to sort of have a sense of people's stories, or people's struggle, or people's narratives, And it doesn't feel like you're just reading words, you see? Because in narratives deeply reflect people's journey, people's struggles, people's positionality, And that's one of my preferred methods. But of course, you can use as many methods as you deem necessary. So I'm just going to pass it on so that we can have a sense. And then the people that I interviewed for this book might you might be familiar with them, with the work. I don't know how well read you are. You might be familiar with the work. But that's one thing that you might want to consider if you're going to do a dissertation. That's one of the methods I would encourage you to use. You know, of course, like I said, it's not the only method. You can use whatever method you feel will serve your purpose. Okay? Yes. Okay. Question.
Is our testimonials a type of in-depth interview?
Well, it depends how you conduct it. It depends how you. It can be. It can be. It depends what type of parameters you set as you are doing the interview. This is a question you should have asked her. She's the expert. I'm not really an expert in testimony. I just discovered testimony about a year ago. So you have her email. She should be able to answer the question. Yes.
She did say it's not a narrative.
Yeah.
So
Or an oral history.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what's the difference between those three? An oral history versus a narrative versus a testimony?
I will attempt to establish the difference between the three. But like I said, testimony is not my expertise. I recently discovered. I'm still learning about it. Oral history, as you read from one of the chapters. Let's say that you want to. Let's say I want to find out about my roots, right? Well, remember, they are not detached. They're intertwined. They're intertwined. I want to know what happened 50 years ago. You know, an era when I wasn't born yet, right? So what I would do, I would interview elders, people who are much older than I am. My great-grandparents, my parents, or people who are just older, who have lived during that time period, right? Who can tell me what happened because they lived it. You see? But how are they going to tell you these stories? They can tell you through narratives. Through narratives. And it has to be, what's it old? It has to be spoken stories, so to speak. Now, what's it between old history and narratives? I mean, I don't see a huge difference because old story is done through narratives. Yeah. As far as testimony is concerned, I would say testimony is certainly linked to old history and narratives. Although old history doesn't have to be about me. It can be about the whole community, whereas testimonial is about your life. It's about your life experiences. Something that's really deeply personal. I can tell you a story that I'm fully aware of, but I don't feel necessarily connected to it. Whereas testimony is something that reflects who you are as a person, reflects your journey. Does that make sense? So they are all intertwined, but they are not exactly the same. So I feel.
Is narrative then, that was a really good explanation, that clarified it. But as far as narrative, is that where I take your oral history and then I put it into a narrative form? Is that the difference?
Well, it's pretty risky. It's risky because, yes, you can translate what I shared with you in your own way. You can use whatever genre you want to use. But I think it's risky. I would not do that because narratives, you don't translate some people's narratives. You have to respect how they tell the story and present the story the way it was told to you. Does that make sense? This is why in research, when you're sharing a story, when your participant is sharing a story with you, you have to make sure that you're not distorting their stories. So if you, for example, follow what you just said, I'm gonna take your stories and run it through a narrative. That's very risky. What about if you end up misrepresenting my lived experiences?
Right, so for instance, I was telling you last week that we took what's it called, the Seidman model? So we took their words,
Right.
we used their words, but we sort of chose which of their words to put together. So I'm asking, is that an example of narrative?
Well, you can do that, but you have to make sure that you show it to them and asking them
Make sure it's their story.
how you put it together deeply reflect their stories. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Anybody else? And again, to sort of try to explain the whole, all the science chapters in a holistic way, okay? Even the chapter about, in Dr. Tole's book, which is focusing on RAP, research as practice. RAP, research as practice, I would say, particularly, is not so far off from testimonial. Because it's grounded in people's story, in people's narrative. And RAP has its roots in Latin America and Africa, places where people have been oppressed, where there's been a social movement aiming at allowing people to come to voice. You see? A movement that places people's story at the center instead of reducing it to the margins. Does that make sense? So when she was talking about testimonial, I could not help but thinking about my struggle growing up in Haiti. My experience witnessing people being pushed to the margins, people whose stories were not valued. So what testimonial does for you is to enable you to tell your stories in your own voices. It's not a story I'm telling you, and then you're gonna be my interlocutor, or you're gonna be my interpreter. You see? It's a story that I'm able to tell in my own voices. You see? And she gave a very good example. Historically, anthropologists coming from the West, they will go into Africa, and any under the so-called